We have to do something about it. It's about changing the perspectives. And that's why my book is called Narratives, the stories that hold women back at work. Because they are stories that we are giving life by retelling them.
Welcome to another episode of YanaTV. Today our guest is Mette Johansson, who is a coach, a speaker, and an author. And we are going to talk about stories that hold women back at work. Mette, I'm so happy to have you here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Yana.
Well, I'm also very happy that you're here today with us. And let me get straight in. So please tell us, where were you born?
I was born in Denmark many years ago. I didn't grow up in Denmark. I grew up in the Netherlands. In fact, I've lived in 11 different countries by now. And of course, Asia, which is part of what we're going to speak about today. I lived in Asia for, I think it's about 23 years, 14 years in Singapore in total.
So when was the first time that you actually came to Asia?
In 1990, I think, or late 80s.
So what was the first country?
I arrived on a backpack tour over with the Trans-Siberian Railway. So, in fact, it is Mongolia or Russia that was the first country on the Asian continent, Mongolia, and then China. Traveled through China many years ago.
What was your first impression of China when you arrived there?
Chaotic. China in 1990 or around that time, right? That was something quite different from what it is today. So yes, very difficult to navigate, very difficult to get around without the language. And probably the most interesting story I can share in terms of in terms of my first encounters with the culture. I studied Mandarin at university, and along the way you learn some of the characters for time. And that's where I thought, oh, it's so irrational. It's so illogic. And that in fact was the big aha, the big learning moment. We were studying the characters for time. And if you think about it, if you think about time in English or
it's
whatever.
Linear, right?
Linear?
Yeah.
Where do you think it went? Where is yesterday? Where is tomorrow? If you were to point at it and think along with this as well, in whatever language you speak, where is time?
This is a great question. I mean, for me, right, again, also being educated in the West, right, you either point from left to right, or you point sort of from below to above. As you expand, right?
And if we look at language, you might have thought, if you're thinking along with it, oh, it's way back in the past or way ahead of us in the future. So that is coming from behind
or forward,
going to the front. We're walking ahead together with time. Now, the Chinese characters that are involving last week, next week are last week. Next week. My reaction was, this is irrational. This is illogic. And my next thought was, well, in fact, time doesn't have a direction. Human beings are giving it direction. And that was such a big aha moment for me for
mentality, right?
Exactly.
How people think, the differences in that.
One culture cannot claim ownership over what's logic and what's not. Taking different perspectives is one of the things you definitely are confronted with when you're traveling across the world. And I think that was a very healthy exercise to be confronted with in, around 1990, I guess it was.
You know, I'm one of those people who believes that you should learn as many languages as possible. And I can feel when I speak different language, my mind changes. Like I think differently, I come across differently, I look almost like at life differently. So it absolutely activates different neural pathways. Okay, so you were studying Mandarin, and then you said you lived in 11 countries. And I know that you have been in countries like Taiwan, or you lived in Shanghai, right? If I remember correctly. So what was happening there?
I studied in Taipei in Taiwan, studied for a year there, Mandarin. And after I graduated from my MBA, so some years later, I worked in Shanghai. This was in 1996. I had studied Mandarin at university. And in China, at that point of time, it was not as much of a melting pot as it is today. Today, you have people from all over China working in all corners of China. At that point of time, there were a lot of people from Shanghai speaking the Shanghai dialect, and I did not understand what they would speak about when they spoke amongst each other in the office. Mm-hmm. And I was one of the few foreigners working in that office at the moment. It was difficult at the time.
Like to blend in.
It was difficult to blend in. We didn't do the same things in our spare time. And that's why it was very difficult to get friends in Shanghai. On top of it, I also got very sick because of the polluted water there, and that made it even less fun to work in Shanghai. I'm going to Beijing next week, and it's a completely different environment today in comparison to what it was decades ago.
That was Shanghai. And then I also know you used to work and live in Tokyo.
Yes.
So I'm curious, how was Japan and when was that?
Japan was in two different periods. So it was from 97 till 2000 and from 2003 to 2006. So 6 years in total, two different periods.
And how was that working there as a Caucasian white woman, right? Blonde, blue eyes. I mean, Japan is known to be a relatively close culture, especially for people are friendly, but not too friendly, right? So how was that?
Now, what I understood from working in Japan was that, of course, your specific environment makes such a big difference, whether you like it or not, what your memories are going to be. I have fond memories of Japan, whereas Shanghai, where I ended up having to be flown out of the country because of health reasons, that of course leaves some negative thoughts. I didn't appreciate it very much at the time, of course. Now, Tokyo, we made great friends. I felt very comfortable working in Tokyo. One of the reasons that I explain this with is that I was already so different that...
How you look, clearly.
And looking so different, it means that you don't have to try and fit in. Now, the difference between Shanghai and Tokyo was that in Tokyo, you would have similar hobbies, similar interests, similar things you would do in your spare time compared to the local population. Mm-hmm. We were living side by side with people from the country, meaning you get to know each other. Later on, when I had children, my children went to local schools, or at least international mixed schools at some stage. And that means that the other parents that you meet, they're local Japanese people. Mm-hmm. And that was one thing that was very fascinating about living in Japan, that because we are on the same development level in terms of economical development, it was much easier to get to know people there than it had been for me in Shanghai. Although I'd say that today most people think that it's probably easier to integrate in Shanghai than it is in
Japan
Tokyo.
At the moment,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. I had the opposite experience.
Interesting, very interesting. And I know you have just recently released a book, The Stories That Hold Women Back at Work. And I assume that those are stories of women across different countries in Asia. So tell me a few. What are the stories that hold women back at work? So now we all want to know.
All right. There's plenty of stories.
Okay. Give us one or two. Okay.
Yes. I'll give you a couple.
Yes.
The main one that I absolutely like sharing is women are too emotional. So they cannot be leaders because we're too emotional. And I interviewed a chief human resource officer from India, and her comment was, women too emotional? You should see the boys in the boardroom. If they don't get their ways, they will slam their fist on the table, they will shout, they will jump up. Women too emotional? Ha! And it is true. We are often having this narrative, this myth that women are too emotional. When we think more about it, it is not about being more or less emotional. It is simply that some emotions are accepted at the workplace and some aren't. Mm. And isn't it interesting? Because the emotions that are affecting others negatively, anger, they are accepted. And emotions that are more affecting ourselves, like frustration or sadness or stress, They are not accepted. Emotions that are affecting others negatively are accepted. And when we're frustrated about something that's more inward looking, that is not accepted. And then we call women more emotional, and they're too hysterical, too emotional. They cannot be leaders.
You know, it's interesting. I actually never thought about like from that perspective on this topic, but it's very true. And I think usually a lot of emotions which are being expressed outside, it tends to be perceived as masculine, and a lot of emotions which are internalized are perceived as feminine. And so here is that separation. I wonder, so what can we do about it in the workplaces, please? We have to do something about it.
We have to do something about it. It's about changing the perspectives. And that's why my book is called Narratives, the stories that hold women back at work. Because they are stories that we are giving life by retelling them, by not thinking about them. Like the story I started off with, that time has a direction.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We are not stopping up and thinking about it. We need to stop for a moment and think about, hang on, what is rational here? Or what's really the real story here? Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And by shedding more light on different perspectives, that is when we can shatter those narratives.
Conversation. I'm hearing, right, that we need to have more conversation about this topic, and perhaps also in the workplace. Well, that would be, I would encourage you guys when you go, to work, or if you run a company, even more so, please have a conversation like that. It would benefit everyone about our emotions, which accepted and which are not. Okay, so this is one story. So what else do we have that holds women back?
There's lots of different stories about what work women can or can't do. Women can't work in sales. When I was working...
Because?
There's all the entertainment.
I know some phenomenal, women who are like really good salespeople.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because communication, and not least listening, is what we usually say that women are quite good at. So why can't they be salespeople? It might be that it is linked to some of the entertainment in the evening.
You mean going to bars and dinners and after dinner program,
exactly.
Where women and cigar bars, where women are not very welcome.
Exactly. It is some of the entertainment that's going on, where some of the deals are made in the evening. It's maybe more traveling. So those are some of the reasons why a lot of people think that women can't be salespeople. Whereas again, if we look at what are some of the things that a lot of women are very good at, they're absolutely core, essential to being a good salesperson.
We just had an interview with Jerome Joseph, right? I mean, the branding expert. And I remember that he said that people actually make emotional decisions when they buy something, and then they rationalize it with their logic. So ironically, you could say that women are much better in triggering other people's emotions, whether it is good or bad. That's the whole other conversation, but we're good at it. And so when it comes to presenting something from an emotional point of view, I mean, that's how people buy or don't buy. Okay, so sales, give me one more. So what is something else that you feel holds women back?
One of the things is what we say about women not being ambitious, or mothers not really wanting a career. That is one thing that I hear very often. As part of my work, I also do some women in leadership program. Mm-hmm. And as part of these programs, we are doing your big audacious goal. What is that big career goal that really nice to have? Is if you nailed that job, you would just have made it.
Yes.
And what very often happens in one of these courses is that one or two women say, I'm not really ambitious. What I respond to that situation then is, what if you were a man? And it's so interesting. Every single time you have one of the women who said, I'm not really ambitious, pick up their pen and start planning for that big, audacious goal.
Mm-hmm.
So why is it that we're saying that women are not ambitious? It is probably because they see themselves in how the workplace is today. And let's face it, the workplace has been designed by men.
For men.
Yeah. And not necessarily with women in mind.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe me, look at the books that are taught at MBA programs. I went back and looked at my MBA school books, and they're all written by the white American, able-bodied, pretending to be straight, at least, if not straight, man, right? How many million people is that? That's like 100 million people who are deciding what the gold standard of business has to be.
This is horrible.
That is reality. So the business world has been designed by men for men and not with women in mind. And that is why women often don't see themselves as leaders. They don't see themselves as having a career. They might also have obligations at home.
Yeah. And then they're worried whether it's going to take them away from their children
Absolutely.
or their spouse or any other responsibilities they have.
Absolutely.
And they still want to show up as a mother or wife or daughter-in-law, right?
There's a lot of factors that are playing into this. Also, that women think that there's too much politics that they don't want to be dealing with, or they feel that there's many other tasks that they have to do that they don't really want to be doing.
For example,
whether it's late nights.
Yeah. Again, entertainment, weekend, which is often family time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those are limiting factors that hold women back, because you don't necessarily need to work more to advance in your career.
I like that.
It is.
I think everyone would like that better.
It is about output. It is about making sure that you're delivering quality, you're working with your people, making sure that your teams are delivering. And there's smarter ways of working than working harder all the time.
I know that your theme, right, when you go and work with people is authentic leadership. And so I'm just curious also, when we talk about men and women at workplace, does that play any role? That somehow women feel that, they're soft-spoken, that their body composition and structure is different, they come across differently when they come in their boardroom, they dress differently. And so do they feel that somehow impacts their ability to progress and impacts their leadership style?
Absolutely. We used to also divide characteristics up in more male characteristics and more female characteristics. The more male characteristic of being assertive, win-win, wanting to knock out the competition, go-getter, all of that. Yeah. Whereas the women, the female characteristics would be seen more as nurturing, caring, empowering, taking care of your teams, collaborating. And I do like that there's a tendency to speak more about collaborative characteristics and competitive characteristics, because it means that you don't have to be one or the other just because you are identifying with one gender or the other. So I do believe that that's a very good environment, or a very good point of departure for women to be able to be more successful at work. In fact, I believe that when men feel more and more comfortable about embracing the nurturing characteristics, they are also opening the doors for more women to lead, who don't want to lead with knocking down the competition to win over others. It's opening the door for women if we allow anybody to lead with collaborative or competitive characteristics.
You know, it's another very interesting point of view. I know many men, and I know many business owners, and many of them have been, here, and also like in my coaching professional life. And the criticism that I often hear from guys towards women in the workplace when it comes to leadership and the way how we are, that we may be not entirely sort of goal-oriented or result-oriented, because when you try to be like more collaborative and inclusive and empathetic, in my opinion, often it sort of delays the productivity, right? And then the company needs to make money, it needs to close deals, certain number of deals. So how do we combine those, that business is still a business, but people actually feel that they're cared for and not, stressed?
The answer is in your question. We combine it.
We combine it. Okay.
We combine it. Diversity increases group intelligence because we can bring together different perspectives. And organizations today do not function well if we're only going to be competitive, focusing on results. And there's plenty of companies who've shown that out there today as well, that by bringing in more human elements, they are becoming more profitable as well.
Yeah.
Microsoft is one of the companies that's gone very much away from focusing on products and profitability to much more people and purpose as well. And they've been doing pretty well. The little dip where everybody was dipping after COVID, at the tail end of COVID, and they're recovering very nicely from it again.
Just moving conversation, because I know we're coming towards the end of the interview soon. So I just want to ask a few other questions, knowing you have been in Singapore now, what is it, 10, 11 years, right? How is your experience working and living in Singapore?
I love it. What I like about Singapore is that it's really that melting pot. I've lived in 11 different countries, and being in a place like Singapore, where already Singapore society is very mixed, it is a place where different perspectives can come together. And Singapore has also been very open to embracing foreigners, regardless of their backgrounds, as long as foreigners are adding value to Singapore. So overall, of course, when you come from a different place, Singapore, it's safe. English is spoken. There's great infrastructure. It's business friendly. Yes, Singapore is definitely one of the places where it's easy to integrate as somebody coming from a different country.
And maybe the final question for today, if you were to give advice, are there Western Caucasian looking people who live in everywhere around the world and maybe considering to come and work in Asia, and maybe let's focus on, Singapore or Southeast Asia because it's culturally a bit more close. What would you tell them?
To me, with cultural intelligence, the main part is curiosity and respect. Have curiosity for wherever you go, and make sure that you also respect that other point of view. That you're respecting that people are different, that they have different point of views, remembering that logic is not something that we can have ownership over. There are different ways of doing things. So curiosity and respect is really what brings you a very long way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yana.
Thank you. That was Mette Johansson on YanaTV today. And Mette and I would love to hear from you guys in the comments. So please let us know if you have worked and lived in different countries of Asia, and which countries were there, and how did you like it or not? What was your honest experience? And we would love to have this conversation. And especially when we talk about stories that hold women back at work, I think it is just a phenomenal contribution and conversation. So if you want to add your opinion, feel free to do that too. And I personally would love to thank Muse Studio for hosting YanaTV. We absolutely love it here. And remember, guys, to subscribe to the channel and share this episode with friends. The conversations shared with our loved ones are becoming so much deeper. And I see you next time. And I love your name. Did I ever told you this? Such a futuristic name. It's like Meta Universe.
It's become so much easier after Facebook changed its name to Meta.
Yes.
Now I can simply say, think about Facebook and you'll more or less get my name right.
I love that.